Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I rank the best overall parallel designs for 1994. I really like this list a lot, and the three honorable mentions, I have a top five, and then the three honorable mentions are cards that are all very, very worthy to be on this list. There are a few cards that are outside of the list that would have been kind of nice to talk about, but I just don't want to go on and on about, well, I do want to go on and on about, but I'm pretty sure that you guys are going to be pretty good with a list of just 8 options here. But the thing that was challenging was the fact that there are parallels that were done differently in different sports. And so the question is, do you do just talk about all of it as one and then one of them is the best, or do you break them into different spots on the list? And in this case, there were 3 cases where I had to make that decision. 2 of them I chose to do separately, and then for the Pinnacle Dufex, I'm doing that all as one group. But it did make it a little interesting in terms of where do I put the different examples of one sport versus another. And in the honorable mentions, I have, well, this is owned by Topps. So, but before I get to Topps itself, I do have to talk first about my first honorable mention, which is the one on the outside of all of these cards, which is Finest Refractors. I've never really been a big fan of refractors, and the reason for that is, well, okay, let me rephrase that. I love refractors. I'm not a fan of finest refractors because they don't capitalize on what the finest technology should be able to do. When you get the refractor in there, it just brings out all the intricacy that they really didn't design into these cards too well. In Bowman's Best, they would be getting to that, but not quite yet. And so over in Finest, the hockey card almost made the list. I just don't like how they designed the background to make the effect come out. Basketball is the one that I'm using in this list because here this actually does succeed at it, because when I look at the middle of that card with that explosion, this card is really cool. And I go, that is Finest. Except on the outer border, it's that dull gray, everything gets lost. They could have done so much with this card, but they didn't. And that's the problem Finest has in the early couple of years, is the fact that the potential was there, but the way the cards were designed failed to capitalize on it. And so I don't get intrigued, and it doesn't hold my gaze. The Finest cards get my attention, I look at it, and then I move on. And in the case of basketball, this is the one that could most potentially hold my gaze. It's just that I get bothered by the border around the outside of the card, and that's what always holds it back. So that's why I have it right here at the fringe at the beginning of the honorable mentions. And then I move on to the next one, which is the Topps special effects cards, again for basketball. And in this case, this is a card you gotta experience in order to understand it, because it doesn't really photograph well. The whole point is that there's a chromatic finish on the background that's kind of a holofoil, where when you turn it right, it brightens up and it disappears, and it's got a weird look to it that's really cool. You also have a little bit of holofoil for the player name, but the way that the card is experienced is just a really intriguing experience. And it's a fun card set that I've been putting together over time. I'm still at the early stages of it, but the way that it looks, every time I experience this card, I just go, this is really interesting. And that's the thing that's so special about it, is how distinct, how unique it is. And it really carries well. Yes, the Finest cards look better, but these cards are more fun and more interesting to me. That's why I have it ranked here on the list. But the other honorable mention I have is the Top special effects for football, which is, to me, in a whole nother category and leaves the other 2 in the dust, which is the fact that with this card, they have a holofoil background, or they took the background and they covered it with holofoil with a grid of these little, they're discs that have light that shine around them. And it makes the card look 3-dimensional. That's what's interesting, is that the player, and if there's a foreground player with him, they feel like they're on a different plane. So they're out here, the rest of the background's back here. That effect actually comes through really well. And then I love the holofoil for the border and the name. The way that looks is also really amazing. The only reason I don't have this as the number 5 card is the fact that the grid all too often is too strong on the card and distracts me. So when the grid is done right, it's just spectacular. But when the grid is too up front, it holds the card back. So that's why I have it just outside of the top 5. Although I was tempted to put it at number 5 because number 5 and number 4 are both Upper Deck. The Electric Diamond is what I have for number 5. And Electric Diamond is baseball. This is a card where I've never been a big fan of the baseball cards because I know what the card could be. I've seen it in football and in hockey. In the case of, and really for basketball as well. In the case of baseball, the images are a little bit smaller, which works well with this card, but it doesn't quite have the same strength that the other sports have, but that's mainly because of the border on the side. Now, this is the Upper Deck SE basketball set used in baseball. And the baseball cards look a lot better than the SE cards did, but still, they lack the strength that I saw in the other sports. But when you add the Electric Diamond effect, which is really fine pieces of silver holofoil that has a speckly prismatic quality to it, it's like stars, and they just kind of twinkle on the card and bring out everything that's interesting on the card and make these cards look great. That's what I love about these cards. And I would have the reason I have this separate from the other two cards, which is for football and hockey, they didn't do it for basketball, is the fact that when you go over to football and hockey, here they have more room for it, which means that it comes through a lot stronger. Also, the cards look, to me, a whole lot better, especially the hockey cards. The way the hockey cards look, these images are really rich and really strong, and then you add a stronger punch of that effect, and man, they're incredible. The only problem I have with the hockey card, though, is the text at the bottom, which looks like it came from the Upper Deck SE cards. That is a little blocky, and it lacks the spirit of what we saw in football. Because over in football, when you look at the electric text down at the bottom, it looks a lot better. And that's the strength the football card has. Well, specifically the gold foil, I should say that. The silver cards don't look nearly as good, but the gold for the football cards is so much better because football is the one place they had both parallels. Hockey, they only had the one. Regardless, both football, which I think the effect looks better, and hockey, where I think the card looks better, they're pretty much tied as spectacular. But I do have them just sitting here at 4, just outside of 3, because at number 3 I got a card that it has the wow factor that you really want to be able to see in a card if you at all can, which is the Topps embossed gold parallel for rookies and for the Houston Rockets. Now, the Houston Rockets, they were the champions of the finals, and then the rookies, of course, are special because they're rookies, so that's why the cards were done differently. The regular cards, I'm not including in this because they look terrible, absolutely terrible. I get what they were doing. They were trying to bronze the cards like a bronze plaque, only in gold. But look, it didn't work in Action Packed when they did it in 1992. They didn't here, even though they can still kind of see some of the background, it holds it back probably. Because look, here's what a normal card from embossed looks like. You got the gorgeous basketball print on the border. You have the image inside. These cards look spectacular. When you bronze it, I'm not even going to show you, it just looks terrible. Conversely, when you look at the Houston Rockets cards and you look at the rookie cards just as a silver, these cards don't really have a lot of life. They're interesting, but they don't have distinction. But man, you add that gold the parallel for these cards and oh wow, because it does double duty. One, it looks really great all on its own. It absolutely does. But then there's also that effect that occurs in the card where you have a 3D effect going on that just makes it even more impressive. And I absolutely love the way these cards come across. They don't have the staying power of the Upper Deck cards, but they have a wow factor that the Upper Deck cards can't compete with. But now we move on to number 2, and now we get to Dufex. And the Pinnacle Dufex cards, and I'm just going to call them Pinnacle Dufex because I'm not going to get into which particular name they have for each sport. There were 3 different sports they did this, And for hockey, this is easily the trailer of the three because they have a really cool fan. I love the way the fan looks. And the logo, I think, here actually works extremely well. This is the best of the three logos, but only here because now you can actually see that it's a pennant hanging from a chain from the Pinnacle logo. And that's what makes this card, that's the biggest strength that this card has, because that fan doesn't have a continuous fan quality to it. And so it feels like it's kind of hemmed in, kind of limited in what it can do. When you go over to football, now you're in another category because the background of the card looks a lot better. It's a continuous pattern, which means that it has kind of a never-ending quality to it, which is really cool. But the satin finish of the player, where all the detailing in the player is actually Dufexed on it, which just makes this card a continuous pattern of Dufex. The only break from it is the logo down at the bottom, which is actually a good quality of this card. These cards are spectacular, but man, when you go over to baseball, oh wow, that the sparkliness of the light shimmering out from the Pinnacle logo is surreal. This is one of the top 5 effects in sports cards of all time. Absolutely, hands down, incredible, except for the fact that the player doesn't have Dufex detailing, which means that he just kind of appears and disappears and appears and disappears. That's what holds the card back. You have the shimmery light and the player's like disappeared, so you can't even see him. That's the limitation, and that's what keeps this card out of the top spot. But the one in the top spot is not a hands down type of a top card. This is one that I have here for me, and that is the Playoff Contenders Insert Parallel, where they redid all the fronts of the cards paired up on cards, so they have 2 fronts on every single card. And this card is one you absolutely have to have in your hand to understand it. I'm not saying that if you did, you would find it better than the Dufex cards, but what I'm saying is, in order to understand these cards, you have to have one, because right off the bat, it has relief. It actually has a 3D quality to it. It's very, very small. I mean, it almost looks like the Wildcard Super Chromes from the previous year, but it has a slight relief. But on both sides, they have different reliefs, because they did the same thing here that Topps did with embossed, which is that they press the card from both ends. And that means that the card on either side is its own 3D effect. And it's very subtle, but it's an interesting little quality to the card. Then, of course, you have the holofoil, which is phenomenal on this card, mainly because it contrasts with the fact that the cards do have Techchrome on it, but the Techchrome doesn't quite look the way that it does on normal cards, which gives it an interesting quality to it. But then you add the 2 fronts on the card, and that puts it over the top. This is a card where every time I get one of these cards, I feel honored to have just this card. Whatever card that is, I'm honored to have just it. I feel like the luckiest boy in the world. That's the way that it comes across. To me, this is a card where I can't sit down and give you a list to make you go, oh, that's why it's the best. This is one you gotta experience to go, oh, okay, yeah, now I know what he's talking about. For me, this is the best. And that's my list of the best parallels of 1994. Feel free to comment down below on what you feel is the list. If you feel that Finest should have been further up, which is probably the case. I will have the image poll up tomorrow, so you can vote there. I'm going to do, the first one is just going to be Finest cards, because that's what everybody wanted, and then the other one is going to be for the real best cards. If you haven't subscribed, do urge you to do so. Thank you very much for watching.